This is the REI Base Camp. It's currently selling for $549, and this is the Coleman Skydome. It's currently selling for $129.99. Both of these are dome-style tents, and both of them are 6-person size tents. And if you look at the images online and the photos of these different tents online, like I was doing a couple weeks ago when I was tent shopping, they actually look remarkably similar. But when you start using these two tents, you quickly realize some of the important differences between the two. So in this video, I'm going to highlight 6 of the most important differences between these two tents so you can see what you actually get for that additional $420. So without further ado, let's jump in with difference number 1. The first difference between these two is the wind resistance. Now, I did test both of these tents in high 15 to 25 mile per hour winds, and let me just start by saying that this Coleman tent did really badly. It actually bent over to the point that was basically flat on the ground, which would be incredibly annoying if you were on the inside, and it actually bent one of the poles. It damaged one of the poles to the point that I actually had to get some pliers and spend some time repairing it, and that's the only reason it's still standing for this video here. But you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's a budget tent, let's give them a break, but it actually says right on the bag that this tent comes in that it can withstand winds of up to 35 miles per hour, which is just simply not the case according to my testing. Now, if we turn our attention to the REI Base Camp, this thing was like a polyester fortress. It stood up great to the wind. It didn't really bend that much at all. Sure, the rain fly flapped a little bit, but the actual structure of the tent was rock solid. And if you were inside during a windy day on this tent, you would be quite comfortable. So that is a huge difference between these two tents. The second difference between the two is actually one where the cheaper tent comes out on top, and that would be the ease of setup. So this tent is a simpler design, and it has less poles and less things going on, which is one of the reasons it didn't do so well in the wind. However, this does make it a lot easier to set the tent up. It just has 2 poles in the back that form the main structure of the tent, and they go over the top of the canopy and attach with hooks rather than a sleeve, which can be more difficult because you have to then feed the pole through the sleeve and do all of that. The rain fly on the Coleman tent is also simpler than the one on the REI Base Camp, and the REI Base Camp has more poles. In fact, I think it has 5 poles, which is quite a bit more than the 2 main poles in the Coleman, plus this tiny little pole it has to form the awning on the rain fly. And so overall, the Coleman tent is much easier to set up, although to be fair, the REI Base Camp isn't a particularly complex or difficult to set up tent. It just happens to be more so than this Coleman. Difference number 3 is one of the most important things to look at when you're considering a tent, and that is the waterproofing. If the forecast starts to look bad and you're planning a camping trip, you want to make sure that even if it does rain, that you're going to stay dry on the inside, right? That's like one of the main purposes of a tent. However, in my multiple days of rain testing, this Coleman tent actually did leak on multiple occasions, which is obviously not ideal. However, the REI Base Camp did not. It was bone dry in there. I had no issues at all. And if you were having a big rainstorm and even really heavy rain, you would be perfectly comfortable inside of this tent. Difference number 4 is storage. So now if you look at the storage options that these two tents have built into them, and you look in the Coleman, it's just going to give you 2 storage pouches plus an internal shelf that goes towards the top of the tent, which some people might like to use. However, this Base Camp tent has perhaps the best storage on the inside that I've ever seen on a tent. So it has storage pouches that run pretty much along the entire base of the tent, except for, of course, the doors. And then it also has these really large vestibules that go on the outside near the doors on each end of the tent, which can give you some additional storage space for a backpack, or this side even is the larger side, and it can actually fit a full-size camping chair. So if you want some additional space on the outside of the tent, this one has that as well. And so I think the storage options in the REI Base Camp are just dramatically better than what you get inside of the Coleman Skydome tent here. Difference number 5 is actually a really interesting one and sort of a subtle difference between the two. And the Coleman Skydome is actually technically rated as having a floor area of about 1,020 square feet on the inside. But the REI Base Camp is a little bit less, at about 1,008 square foot of floor area. However, I think the actual usable space inside of the tent does favor the REI Base Camp. And one of the reasons for that is that the sides of the tent are just more sturdy, and they seem to be a bit more vertical as well, which gives you more livable space on the inside. Just imagine you're in this tent and you have 4, 5, even 6 people on the inside, and then that wind starts blowing. It kind of turns the tent into a bit of a blanket, like it could just kind of fold over you or at least brush up against your side, which could be pretty annoying. Whereas in the REI Base Camp, I don't think you would have that problem at all. So the internal spaciousness, I think, again favors the REI tent. And then let's talk about headroom a little bit, because headroom is an interesting one. The REI Base Base Camp is rated at having a head space of about 6'2" at the peak stand height, and the peak stand height of this Coleman tent is rated at 6 foot. So technically the REI is rated as being a little bit taller at the peak height than the Coleman, but I actually measured both of them and I got about the same. So for both of them, I got 6 feet as the optimal or peak stand height. However, I do again think that the REI Base Camp is a little bit better because the real move around space while you're standing up in the tent is gonna be a little bit better because it's not going to move around in the wind as much. And I think that the top of the tent has a little bit more structure to it because of the additional poles. And so you're gonna be able to get up and move around in this tent a little bit more than the Coleman Skydome. So that's number 5. Difference number 6 is one that's really important to me personally, and that is the doors of the tents. Now, if you look at the REI tent, you can see right away that it actually has 2 different doors, one on each side, and then the Coleman tent just has one main door. You can also probably tell that the REI doors look a bit larger, and so it'll probably be easier to use, especially if you plan to bring like an air mattress in and out. That'll make it easier. But also, let's talk about zippers. So the zippers on the REI Base Camp are much smoother and easier to use, and it actually is a YKK brand zipper, which is recognized as the market leader in zippers, which could make them last longer. In fact, it will probably make them last longer than alternative zippers. And then this Coleman tent does not have YKK brand zippers, but perhaps even more annoyingly, the zipper cover on this tent. Let's talk about that. So this zipper cover actually switches sides about halfway down the door, which I find to be incredibly irritating because that can actually snag the zipper. So you can get stuck there, and I did several times during my testing. And one thing that I just don't get about this is why the manufacturer would do that. Because if I had to guess, I would say that it's probably cheaper to manufacture the tent with having the zipper cover all on one side, but they've chosen to have it switch sides, which I think is bad for the user. And so overall, I like the doors on the REI Base Camp way more than I like the ones on this Coleman Skydome tent. If you are currently in tent research mode, then I highly encourage you to check out this video right here, where I did a roundup of the 6 most popular family camping tents that are currently on the market. Go ahead and check it out. I think it'll help you out a ton.